Anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist.
We don't want to focus politics on a notion that involves the rejection of principles around which a large majority of our fellow citizens organize their lives.
We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think.
Globally, there's a clear paradox that for many people, the 20th century was the democratic century. It was a time when large parts of the world moved from authoritarian regimes towards various different models or forms of democracy. In the 21st century, we seem to have moved into a different stage where many of the more advanced democracies include many, many people that are increasingly disengaged, disaffected, and distrustful of politics. We have a really strange situation where in North Africa and the Middle East, people are dying in the name of democracy. We live in a world that is dominated by what I call the bad faith model of politics. The bad faith model of politics is generally that politics is bad, it tends to fail, and that politicians in themselves are in it for themselves. They're self-interested, they're inept, they're usually corrupt. And it's this bad faith model of politics that I'm really trying to challenge. I'm not trying to say that democratic politics is perfect or that all politicians are angels. What I am trying to say very clearly is two things. Firstly, that democratic politics delivers far more than most people understand. And secondly, most politicians, the people that I work with day in, day out, are actually pretty much like you and us. There is no them and us. Most politicians themselves are trying to do an incredibly hard job with very few resources, and they cannot make all sad hearts glad, as Crick once said. So, today in the university sector, we're told that all our lectures must involve very explicit hooks, or what are the main things that you want your audience to walk away with an understanding of. And in a sense today, what I'm trying to give you is 5 hooks and 1 argument. My first hook is that healthy skepticism, which is part of any democracy and is generally a healthy thing, has slipped. We've moved from a situation of healthy skepticism towards corrosive cynicism. A blanket depression seems to have fallen upon us when any mention of politics comes. My second hook is the simple fact that there are no simple solutions to complex problems. I think one of the great problems today is not so much with politics and politicians, but dare I say it, with members of the public themselves, that expect politicians to be able to deliver simple and immediate solutions to global challenges. It's never going to happen. And any politician that promises that they can achieve it would be very dangerous. So my third hook, we are in a time when many people have become what I call democratically decadent. By that I mean they take so much for granted. They emphasize their rights, but underemphasize their responsibilities. They're good at taking out, they're not very good at putting in. Many millions of people in the world enjoy the fruits of democratic politics every day. Education, housing, social policies, and peace, without ever really understanding that that is all politics. So, my fourth hook is about public understanding. I spend all my life talking, lecturing, engaging with the public. The public do not hate politics. The public are as interested in politics as ever before. There's an appetite for understanding politics that is not being nourished. And that in itself is a bit of an issue for academics, who I think, particularly political scientists, have spent far too much time in their offices and far too little time in and amongst the public. My final hook is very simply that politics is not a spectator sport. You cannot just heckle from the sidelines. What we need to do is move from this politics of pessimism towards a richer politics of optimism. But that optimism will only come by more people being willing to stand up and get engaged themselves. The 21st century will be shaped by what I call the politics of public expectations. The politics of public expectations is about how do we manage the relationship between individuals and the state and between individuals and politicians. In a sense, our politicians are trapped in trying to deliver more and more and more for less. When in a sense, what politicians need to be doing is not increasing supply, but at least at the same time trying to control demand. by cultivating a more rational, more realistic relationship or understanding about the limits of politics. Because politics has limits and so does the state. We use the word crisis too much. We've got a fuel crisis at the moment, a Cornish pasty crisis. The word crisis has to be the most overused word in the political lexicon. If you want to understand what democratic politics looks like when it fails, go to some of those parts of the world where democracy really is failing. I'm not trying to convince you that everything is perfect. Politicians are human, therefore they will make mistakes. Politics is messy. It's compromise-based. It often demands that things take place in secret, just as our own lives do in everyday life. All the issues that I'm talking about are global. If you look at what's going on in America today, the rise of anti-political sentiment, the challenges, Obama has been a great demonstration of what I call the politics of public expectations. Lift them so high to get into office that in some extent failure is inevitable. Obama is a classic example of the fact that it's often far easier to get into power than it is to actually govern. This is Bernhard Crick. He started off his career and he wrote 3 books very quickly. He wrote The American Science of Politics, he wrote The Reform of Parliament, and he wrote In Defense of Politics. 3 fantastically insightful books that are still influential today. His approach to scholarship was based on 3 elements. The first one was a commitment to bridging politics as theory with politics as practice. Crick was a man who was willing to get involved, to dirty his hands in the day-to-day life of politics. He was involved in Northern Ireland with the peace process. His second major approach to writing was that he wanted to write in a clear and accessible manner. And if you look at this book, it's readable. It's the most fantastic book, but he followed a very Orwellian approach to writing. Orwell's got that famous essay, Politics in the English Language, which has very strict rules about how to write clearly. We live in a time when academics, in a sense, have this belief that if a normal person, a layman, can read their work, it can't be good enough. You have to intellectualize everything and make it completely inaccessible. Whereas what I think Crick did very nicely was show that the best books tend to be accessible, open to everybody, and also relatively short. And the final important part of Crick's work was that he believed that academics and social scientists had a responsibility to the public at large. That the role of an academic wasn't just to write books and articles in your office, it wasn't just to work with politicians in departments, it was to play a broader social role in helping society to understand why politics mattered and why sometimes it goes wrong. And I think that social responsibility of academics to the broader public has almost been completely lost. Crick's basic thesis was politics is about compromise, negotiation, talking. It's about us, not I. It's about voice, not choice. And that democratic politics mattered because it gave us tools through which different people with different wants and desires could live together without resorting to war or fighting. It might not be perfect, but it was the best way we had of generating, understanding, engaged, and peaceful societies. Those pieces of work that we've just seen are the very few pieces of work that dare to try and defend politics. What we have actually is a much broader terrain of work, which is basically either fueling or seeking to understand what I call the bad faith model of politics. Politics is failure, politicians are all bad. Defending politics from itself is about public expectations and public understandings of what they can expect from politics. In many ways, the opposite of that is defending politics from the media. The only scandal that we really have isn't the Leveson inquiry and News International. The biggest scandal is really that the media has been able to get away with its tricks for as long as it has been able to. We live in an environment where the media believes that only bad news sells. It's very, very hard for politicians, when faced with a daily tidal wave or barrage of attack politics that only wants bad news, to try and cultivate a direct or meaningful relationship with the public. Incredibly difficult indeed. And if asked in a question after my presentation today about the MP's expensive scandal, you might say, well, no, surely not. the MP's expenses scandal was all about journalism doing what it should do in a democracy. I would actually challenge that. I would say that the MP's expenses scandal and the role of the Telegraph was the political equivalent of napalm. It didn't help democracy, it destroyed it. It made a lot of good people leave politics, and it certainly put off a lot of people from entering politics. I think one of the important things that Crick gives us is a way of learning to re-engage with the real world in a way that deepens our understanding of politics, not just for other academics, not just for other university students, but for the public in general.
It seems to me that political parties are a massive problem, because political parties are the way in which people get involved in politics, and political parties are pretty ghastly organisations. And their ghastliness is observable in all sorts of ways. At the local level, political parties are very weak, they're hollowed out. I remember when I was involved in politics going to a meeting, I'll never forget it, going to a meeting of a local Labour Party branch, and after they spent the first 2 hours discussing the minutes of the last meeting, eventually I leant forward and I said, look, could we just talk about something? Could we talk about something else? I said, could we talk about new members, about retracting new members? And they said, oh no, we're not really very interested in new members, because what we found, Matthew, is they only ever come to one meeting. So, political parties, aren't they a huge, huge problem? And wouldn't you be better addressing the things that have to change about politics as much as saying to the public you're being unfair to politicians?
Political parties are part of the problem, but they're also part of the cure. The public are part of the bigger picture, as are all the rest of the different institutions we have. What I'm saying is the great problem we have at the moment is that such a collective black cloak of doom has fallen on society about politics and what it can deliver. Our sense of optimism has been hollowed out. In a sense, there are many examples of the public rising up and pressurizing politics to behave in a certain way, but too many people have simply switched off, which is, in a sense, you can't do in a democracy.
What about the internal culture of politics? Within the heart of politics, there is a kind of tribalism. There is a spirit which isn't particularly healthy. It isn't a particularly constructive. These are not people wandering around saying to themselves, what can I do that's best in the public interest? These are people wandering around saying, if I do Fred a favour, then maybe he'll help me out with Jeff, and I'll get this thing, and then I might get into the newspapers, or I might win that vote, or I might get elected into the shadow cabinet, or the cabinet, or whatever. And I think the public knows that. I think the public sees that, and they think these aren't people wandering around saying, how can I best meet the public interest? These are people wandering around trying to survive by doing favours, cutting deals, being opportunistic in all sorts of ways.
Yeah. Politics and making politics work on a day-to-day basis is often about cutting deals, doing favours, seeing opportunities and being willing to be flexible. But the way you've just presented that is a complete caricature of what I see as the bad faith model of politics. That actually many MPs that I know and work with, even many ministers, dare I say, are actually there because they have this rather odd desire to try and change things for the better. Now, everybody might not agree with what they're doing, and I certainly know that those ministers find changing things incredibly hard at the centre, but I don't get that sort of... There is a problem about access to politics
That's how they start out. That's how they start out. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Politicians get into politics to make the world a better place, generally speaking. But they lose sight of that because within the system, the way the system works, you start off saying, well, it's a means to an end, and in the end you forget the ends because you're just consumed by the means.
Yeah, I think you're right. I remember Gerald Kaufman's famous book, How to Be a Minister, when he talks about departmentalitis and how all your great ambitions get lost as you become corrupted to fighting for what's for the best for your department and all else. I think there are problems with that. But again, I think those problems can be overstated. We live in a world which institutionally is incredibly fragmented. Joining things up is incredibly hard. But there are some very innovative examples of good things, innovative things that are trying to happen. If you just look at public policy, Sure Start was a massive high-risk strategy by the Labour government. What was very interesting about it was it went across a range of departments, it was massive multi-billion pounds, but the benefits of the Sure Start project will not be seen for 10, 15, 20 years. It's a generational policy. The great problem with politics as it exists today is very short term. Politicians are, in a sense, trapped in a defence of politics against itself. they have to be seen to be delivering tomorrow, the day after. And some MPs fall into that, and they have to be associated with a reform and all the rest of it. But on the issue about the bubble, because there is a bubble in Whitehall and Westminster, and I know that very closely, and in a sense, I pride myself on being something of an outsider. But there is also, it's too easy to just come up with excuses. There's a bubble, I didn't go to the right university, or I can't break in here, or whatever. Actually, what there is a ladder of participation. And I know many people that have started off by getting involved in politics when their children were young in the local school governors. Then they've got into the local council. They've worked on the board of a non-departmental public. Then, when the kids are older, they've decided to stand for an MP. There are pathways into politics. The problem we have at the moment is the very best people in society that are out there who can contribute a lot look at the attack politics down the road. They look at what the media will do to them and their child and the boyfriends or girlfriends they had at university. They say, sod it.